Ahead. So tonight we will go over some introductory information. And like I said before, we have a person who helped us, a firm that helped us redraw our boundaries. That's here for a presentation, and then we'll take questions and comments. And like I said, we have translation services available. All right, so just a quick overview why we're here. We never, prior to January 2020, we never had trustee areas. We had just an at-large election process for our school board members. In January 2020, the board selected trustee areas, and we have 5 of them, 1 for each board member. So these trustee areas were based on the census data from 2010. And we all know that in 2020, another census was conducted, and that data, we received the data from that census in 2022. So it took a while due to the pandemic for that process to be completed and for us to get our data. So what we are charged with doing now is taking a look at that data and seeing if we need to make adjustments to the trustee areas. And the general rule is that there's more than a 10% shift in population, then you need to make some adjustments. And the difference between 2010 and 2020 for us was a 12.5% shift. So what that means is we need to make some minor adjustments to our trustee areas. And we'll kind of walk through that tonight. So as far as the process goes, the first thing we did was generate some map options based on the new data. We then shared that information with our school board. And once we did that, they provided us with some feedback, and we have some revised maps to share tonight. So tonight we will share those and get any community feedback from those of you out in the Zoom world or anybody who wants to show up tonight here. And then on April 12th, we will hold a public hearing on the revisions, and that will, on April 12th, if we need to make any revisions based on feedback from tonight, we will. And then on April 12th, we'll have the public hearing, and the board will either approve the adjustments to these lot lines on either the 12th or the 19th. Okay, so now we'll get into what these changes look like. And we're ready to shift from this presentation to the redistricting partners one. Thank you. And as soon as we get there, go ahead, you can make the change now. So exit out of this and go to the other presentation. Thank you.
All right, would you like
to? All right, Kate. Well, here you are. Sorry, I'll go ahead, Kate. I'll let you introduce yourself, and then your presentation will be up short.
Fantastic. So my name is Kay Montpleasure. I am a project manager with Redistricting Partners, and I'm happy to be here for our community outreach meeting tonight. So welcome to all of the community members here. So first, we are going to go over some redistricting basics, and then our traditional redistricting principles that we follow. We're going to talk about communities of interest, what they are, and give you some examples. We're then going to go over our current 2020 census data. We have 3 draft maps for you tonight. And then we are going to take public testimony on communities of interest and then go over our public hearing schedule. So first, what is redistricting? It is the process of adjusting district lines every 10 years after the release of US Census data. And when people usually think of redistricting, they think of congressional and legislative redistricting, but local governments also must go through this process. And so New Haven USD is also going through this process to ensure that districts are rebalanced after the census. And beyond creating districts of equal population, redistricting also serves to empower local communities and also preserves voting rights. So there are a number of criteria that we call our traditional redistricting principles that have been used nationally and upheld by courts. The first of these, and it's in a ranked system, the first of these is that districts are of relatively equal size. When we talk about equal size, we're talking about people, not citizens or voters, a total population. They also have to be contiguous. And so what contiguous means is that districts don't hop or jump. So in other words, you can draw them with one line. We also maintain communities of interest, which we will go a little bit more in depth in, but ultimately it's a community that would benefit from being maintained in a single district. We follow city, county, and local government lines, and we also keep districts compact in both appearance and function. So what we mean by that, when we look at compactedness and appearance, I'm sure that when most of you think of the word gerrymandering, you think of those long, snaky districts. We want to stay away from those and make sure that populations are kept together. And they're also kept as compact as possible. So in other words, square or circular. We also keep districts compact in function. So what that means is sometimes on paper, a community might look like it's right next to another one, but there may be factors that you don't see in a 2D map, like freeways that separate communities, or rivers, or just different things that separate a community. We want to make sure that we are keeping communities compact in function as well. So a community of interest, it's a neighborhood, a community, or a group of people that have common policy concerns and would benefit from being maintained in a single district. And a community of interest is probably the most interesting traditional redistricting principle because it's defined by you, the community members. Another way of understanding a community of interest is it's a way for a community to tell its own story about why it's unique when compared to surrounding communities. And keeping communities of interest together is a very important principle in redistricting. It's especially helpful for communities who have been traditionally left out of the political process. And community members can define their communities by telling their own stories and describing their concerns to policymakers. So ultimately, communities of interest are the building blocks of districts, and they can include ethnic and language minorities and many other groups as well. We look at communities of interest as subjective and open-ended to make sure that they are as inclusive as possible. There are also communities that are covered by the Voting Rights Act, or the VRA. These are Latinos, Asians, and African Americans. And while communities of interest may include race, absolutely, it cannot be the predominant factor when we're drawing district boundaries. So we have a couple examples of communities of interest here. We can see here an area of downtown that shares public service, could be a community of interest, a school district, a media market, an area with a shared language or shared geographic features. These are really just a few examples to help you start thinking about your community of interest. So while we defined what a community of interest is, let's definitely understand what a community of interest is not. So the Fair Maps Act explicitly prohibits the following groups from being considered a community of interest. These are political party affiliations, incumbents, and political candidates. And then it's difficult in redistricting to truly consider groups of similarly minded people that do not share a similar geographic location, and also community of interests that are district-wide, county-wide, or city-wide. So when thinking of your community of interest, there are three critical questions that you want to ask yourself when defining your community. The first is, does the community have a shared culture, characteristics, or bond? So when we think of this, our personal stories are very powerful. So you want to ask yourself what makes your community unique, and imagine describing your community to someone who maybe wants to move to your community. So does your neighborhood share certain celebrations or traditions? Are there important places where your community gathers? What is the history of how your community has come together? We also want to look at if the community is geographic in nature and is it able to be mapped. If you want to keep a community in one single district, we need to be able to map it. And as I said in the last slide, it's difficult to do that when they are citywide or district-wide because we need to also look at balancing an equal population. And finally, how would you describe the community's relationship with the jurisdiction? And how is your community affected by the policy decisions made by elected officials? So policy issues are probably the biggest reasons that most people are invested in redistricting. When we highlight community issues and personal stories and written narratives, it helps demonstrate the importance of having elected officials who understand and respond to community needs. So some questions to ask yourself when thinking about how your community is affected is, has your community come together to advocate for important services, or have you worked for more recognition or support for your community? So now that we've defined communities of interest and gone over our traditional redistricting principles, we're going to look at our 2020 census data. So here are our existing lines for New Haven Unified School District. And here we have our 2020 census data. So we have a total deviation, which is the sum of the absolute values of the highest and lowest districts in population. The planned deviation is 12.2%. So we need to, a total population deviation is a maximum of 10%. So we do need to see a little bit of change, especially in districts 1, 2, and 5, which are the highest and lowest districts. So tonight we do have 3 draft plans to review. We have Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. And each plan has an overview, data table, individual district pages, and an HTML web map where you can really zoom in and look at where those changes are, which I am happy to bring up after this presentation. And they should be available on the redistricting website. So first we have draft Plan A. We have a couple changes here, 2 changes in districts 1, 2, 4, and 5. So here we have our current lines overlay, and the black outline is the proposed draft map A, while the colors are our current lines. So as you can see in that northern area in districts 1 and 2, a bit of 1 has gone into 2 to equal population there. And then over in 4 and 5, we've taken a bit of 4 into 5 to further equalize population. And so here we have our draft Plan A data table. And we have a much lower deviation than our current lines with a total deviation of 5.7%, so well under that 10% maximum. And so draft Plan B, we have one more change than draft Plan A. And as we can see with our current lines overlay, in addition to the changes that we made to draft Plan A, we also have a change in 1 and 2 to further population equalization. At the bottom, there's southernmost area of 1 and 2, taking in that neighborhood there. And we have our data table for draft Plan B with a total deviation of 2.5%, which is really a very low deviation, even lower than our draft Plan A. So draft Plan B is pretty much our draft Plan A with a little bit more equal population. And then finally, we have draft Plan C, which has the same changes that we made to A and an additional change in 2 and 3. We have our data table for draft Plan C with a total deviation of 5.1%. Again, way under that maximum of 10% deviation. So tonight, the community can give feedback in a couple of ways. You can identify preferred plans with an understanding that none of these are final plans. These are draft plans. It's an iterative process, so we'll be taking any feedback we get tonight and adjusting the plans for that. And you can also suggest possible changes. We will provide adjustments to the boundaries with any of the feedback we are getting tonight. And so last week we had our introduction to redistricting and intro to our draft maps. Tonight is our trustee area maps information meeting. And then on the 12th, we have a possibly final adoption, also public hearing on the draft maps, and if necessary, a final adoption on the 19th as well. So I would be happy to take any questions at the moment.
Okay, well, we don't have anybody present that would be asking questions. Do we have anybody out in Zoom that has a hand up? If you are out in Zoom watching this, you may use the raise your hand function, and we will take any questions or comments. Ms. Valdez, do we have anybody in Zoom?
Well, we have no raised hands.
Okay. Well, right. These, we'll give it another minute or two, but these maps will be available for review on our website. I'm sure we can, if they're, we'll have them up there available for review tomorrow, and you can provide, think through them, look at them. We'll have a public hearing on the 12th of April where you can provide any other comments, and that will be considered. And we'll go from there. The board will be reviewing the three options on April 12th, and are any significant feedback that would result in a change. Probably making a decision on the 12th as to which map that will be selected. All right, last call for any questions, any comments. And if we don't have any questions or comments out there, then I think this public information meeting, community information meeting, will end. Kay, you're out there. Thank you for coming, and we'll let you know if anything comes up, but I think this meeting